Welcome to another edition of Wine Guide TV. My name is Ben Edwards. This is Dan Sims, and today we are going to have some fun in Portugal.
Why not? And the inspiration behind this was coming from the back of the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival, which happened up in March of this year. And one of the tastings that we did in the wine retreat, which I was lucky enough to host, was about Portugal, the Phoenix Rising.
And the reason it was called the Phoenix Rising, I did come up with that name. I think I might have had a couple when I thought about it, but it was the evolution of wines that have come out of Portugal over the last 5 to 10 years has been staggering, and a lot of it's come because of the, let's face it, derelict economy that then got propped up by Portugal becoming a part of the EU. A lot of that money went into wine production, and so what we're seeing today is a direct result of some fabulous winemaking, some fabulous technology being applied in traditional areas. What a good result. At least something good came out of it.
Exactly, and then also as well, we're starting to see some of these wines hitting our shores, which is fantastic, thanks to some fabulous importers, particularly these ones, Spanish Acquisition, and also Bibendum. I've got some really wonderful wines. So what I thought we'd do, we look at a white, a red, bit of Madeira, and then getting on to, well, a classic wine when it comes to Portugal, which is absolutely delicious. I'm not going to be spitting that out. Here's a little bit of vintage port. But to kick off,
you're going to talk about this?
Well, look, this is the Quinta d'Amiel, Loureiro, being the grape variety. Come from Vinha Verdes, northern part of Portugal. And I really love this wine. It's a bit of a go-to, like, is in terms of a style about what Portuguese whites. This is what I really love, because it's, again, we talk about freshness, hint of straw, lemon pith, lovely and refreshing and textured and weight. I mean, these guys are fully sick biodynamic.
Yes, they are.
And organic and all that. And just the production styles that you get is just really lovely texture with it as well.
Actually, it's one of the wine that I kind of talk about in two parts. On the nose, it smells all exotic and rich, and then you first put it in your mouth and you get that, and then all of a sudden it clamps down and it's just all bright acid and really crunchy, chalky acidity, and it's just really refreshing. Now, if you think of the freshest seafood that you could possibly have, maybe done with a bit of coriander, some really fresh olive oil, a bit of lemon, you know, chucked in the pan, and you have this, you are going to be in heaven. I know. In fact, I did that in Portugal when I was there. Fabulous wines. In terms of Loureiro, there is no better producer at this point in time than Quinta d'Amiel.
I'd agree with that.
Now, in the Douro, still sort of in the northern parts here, in the Douro is actually more famous for its ports, you know, vintage ports that we have, but there's been a very big momentum shift to making dry red wines from the same grape varieties that go into vintage port, and we'll look at one of those later. And so these are what we have, the Tintos, Tinto Roriz, etc., and also one of my favourite grape varieties is Touriga Nacional. Now, I've tasted this wine a couple of times, quite a few times in fact, 2007, a very good vintage, classified vintage for vintage port. But the thing about the Douro is the terroir. It's all, like if you walk through there, it's just like blue slate everywhere you go. And in fact, the ends of the rows of a lot of the vines are actually poles of slate. And so you get this real schisty character. And when you taste that, that has that graphite-y kind of tannin character. Beautiful stuff, really refreshing.
And also you talk about that graphite-y tannin, but there's also lovely depth and weight and concentration of fruit underneath. But there's also, and what I like about that is also, again, that brightness and like dark fruited, almost purple fruits coming through, mixed with that little bit of spice as well as that backbone and structure to it.
And this is, and the good, what I like also about this particular wine, it hasn't been messed around with, it hasn't been smashed by new oak. It's more about an expression of where it comes from, and that's why you get that character. So it also means that the price isn't prohibitive, around $35. You know, you're looking at a really good example of the Douro.
And I think also, you know, for Australian palates, if you're looking to explore some of the wines of Europe, have a look at something like that. I think it's a really nice stepping stone to other regions throughout Europe. Now, heading over to Madeira, and obviously, you know, colours are difficult, but you know, Madeira, very famous island, and probably Madeira for sort of, is, you know, lagging sort of the reputation of, you know, being, whether that be something just, you know, it's old-fashioned fuddy-duddy sort of style, but gee, Enriquez, this particular wine, Cecial, is gorgeous, 10-year-old, lovely, age-worthy. I mean, what they do to these wines, I mean, how they still come together.
It's almost like it's fresh roasted chestnuts and hazelnuts all put together, and then you know, splashed with all sorts of wonderful things. But then when you taste the wine, you think it's going to be all savoury and kind of a bit sort of hard work, but it's really lovely and sweet, and then it dries out. And this is the thing about a lot of these wines from Europe, is that they've got this lovely sweet entry, but then they dry out and they really just make you hungry for olives, nuts. You know, it's the sorts of stuff that you can start a meal with. So when you're thinking about these, don't think necessarily always about Spain.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily always think about
And
sherry
we should
or
say
those
also, speaking about
styles.
almost that sort of sherry styles, but it's wonderfully fresh and, you know, using these styles of wine, especially you know as a sommelier, talking about things like consomme and things like that. You know, these sort of things like Cecial, you know, Madeiras are absolutely gorgeous. You know, you will surprise people when you get to them. Very special stuff.
Now we have a bit of a surprise to finish off with. We were intending to put on a late bottle vintage example of a 2003 Quinta do Noval port, but we haven't. We've actually put on a vintage port. If you remember, 2003 was an incredibly warm year. People were dying on the streets of Paris, well, almost, and you know, it was newsworthy. Massive heat wave, very ripe wines. But for vintage port, that's a good thing because it means that they get maximum amount of flavour, maximum amount of colour, maximum amount of sweet fruit that then gets stomped out of the grapes, chucked into the bottle, left alone, and then we get to drink them. And as young wines, I absolutely love them because they use beautiful, clean spirits today. But they also age for 50, 60, 70 years. There's not many wines out there today, ladies and gentlemen, that you can do that with.
No, and look, there's something about port, and it's very rare and very rare that I get the opportunity to taste vintage ports with age. And when you do, it's incredibly special. I know we've had a chance to share some together. But, you know, they're just amazing. Every time I have one, I get so incredibly surprised about, one, how much I love it. Two, you know, how sometimes fresh they are. I mean, you look at that wine now, I mean, 2003, it's very drinkable and approachable, but that almost like could stay in suspended animation.
No, not almost
No,
good. It actually will.
Stay in suspended animation for 30 years. I mean, as an investment in terms of wines all age, I mean...
They look expensive on paper, but in actual fact, they're a bargain. I could highly recommend something like this. Quinta do Noval is one of the very, very, very best producers. This is just a bit of a snapshot of Portugal. Portugal is exciting, a great country to visit, and their wines are fabulous. We're getting to see more and more of them thanks to wonderful importers.
And on that note, we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Yes, we will.